there, and welcome to the Abundant Self Podcast, a podcast where we talk about everything there is to learn and to know about what it truly means to have life and life in abundance. My name is Sharon Chabai, and thank you so much for tuning in. Hello, hi, and welcome to the Abundant Self Podcast. Once again, if this is your very first time here, my good name is Sharon Chabai, and I hope and believe or pray actually that by the time you're done listening to this episode that you will have made a decision to become a part of the Abundant Self community. So yes, welcome, Karibu. Bienvenue new to the podcast. This is episode 22 of the podcast, and today we're going to be asking the question, is life really worth living? That is the question of the day. Is life really worth living? But before we can go right into the episode, allow me to give a quick recap of what we talked about in our previous episode, where we were talking about happiness and well-being. And I remember in that episode, I said that for me, happiness, or rather the main question, even before I get to that, the main question that we were asking in that episode is, what does it really mean to be happy? Yeah, what does it really mean to be happy? And for me, for the longest time, every time that question has popped in my mind, I have always been brought to that situation where, someone is asking me, yeah, your name is Chabai. Chabai translated means the happy one. And people would then ask me, okay, so your name is Chabai. Then are you happy? Are you a happy person? And many a times I have gone back, and every time someone has asked me that question, I have really asked myself, am I happy? Because in that moment, of course, if someone asks me, are you happy? Then I'd say, yes, of course, I'm happy. I'm the happy one. I mean, my name is Chabai. I am happy. I have to be happy. But when I just take a step back and really go deep down and want to really uncover that whole aspect, am I really happy? And if I am, then what does it really mean to be happy? And in that particular episode, I mentioned that for me, happiness is tied to whether or not I am living the path that I was created to live, right? Happiness for me is the feeling, it's the after effect of knowing that I am walking the path that I was created to walk, that I am living my purpose, because then there's a lot of contentment, there's a lot of fulfillment, there's a lot of knowing that I am doing what I was created to do. I am doing that which sent me on this earth, because like I've always said on this podcast, is that God sent us on this earth for a particular reason. No one was created to just come and, sit down and wait for the world to end. There's no such thing. Each of us was put on this earth for a reason. And it's important that we find out what that is. And like Evan said, I think in the previous episode, is that I really like and I'm really happy that we are coming to understand the aspect of purpose, that the conversations that are happening around us right now are about purpose. I think I was watching the TV just the other day and I heard them saying that coming Sunday they were going to be having a conversation on purpose. And for me, I was like, yes, this is what people need to really learn. This is what people really need to know, that you were not put on this earth to just eat, sleep, pay bills, and die. And the school of thought that we have here on the podcast is based off of John 10:10 that says that God came. He says, I came that you may have life and have it in abundance. And what that means is that we were not put on this earth to just do the bare minimum, to eat, sleep, pay bills, die, whatever it is you might want to call it. There is so much more that we have to live for. And I thought that it was even important for us to then have this conversation as we mark our very first year anniversary that is coming up very soon, which, by the way, I'm very excited about, to just commemorate, what we've been talking here on the podcast, that God came that we may have life and life in abundance. And what does that mean? What does it mean to live life to the fullest? What does it mean to live life in abundance? So yes, be sure to go and check out episode 21 of the podcast. And like I always like to say, you can either press pause right here, go back and listen to episode 21, or you can listen to this episode up until the very end, and then when you're done, be sure to go and check out episode 21. And an important thing to note actually about that episode is that, for the longest time, I have always had this idea in my mind of it's just about actually what inspired the podcast of, am I living a life worth, is my life really a representation of what God intended for it to be? And a few weeks back, I remember a good friend of mine was asking us the question of how would you rate the quality of your life? And in that particular episode, I mentioned that happiness and well-being are actually tied to the kind of lives that we lead, the quality of lives that we lead. So if that is a conversation you're interested in, and if you believe that that conversation would also add value to either your life or the lives of other people, be sure to go and listen to it and share it with as many as you can. Yeah, so like I said, we have our first year anniversary that is coming up very soon. It's going to be on the 1st of August. And honestly, I am so excited. And I have just been looking back and saying, this has been beautiful. This has been a blessing. And I am so happy that I finally listened to that inner voice inside of me that was constantly pushing me to start the podcast. In as much as, yes, I started the podcast 3 years late, I like to believe that I started it right on time. I started it when I needed to start it. I think sometimes we think that, we are not doing things because we feel like we're not ready. But even in those moments, I feel like God is always shaping us. He's always just, inspiring us and giving us the confidence and everything that we need to start. So yes, I may not have started the podcast in 2020 when I had the idea, but I am excited and I am happy that at the end of it all, I did start the podcast. And honestly, it has been, like I said, a beautiful journey. It has had its unique set of twists and turns. I know a big challenge that I have had is trying to balance between work and the podcast. So many people have asked me how I do it. How am I able to constantly give my 100% at work and still show up for the podcast? And I think I even talked about this in the episode on consistency and growth. You can go listen to that as well. But in truth, it has been quite a huge challenge. It has been a huge challenge to stay focused, to stay consistent, to keep showing up for the podcast. It has been hard. It has been hard to balance between the podcast, work, life in general, church, my relationships, my friends. I mean, it has been a really tricky balance. But somehow I think having that why at the back of my mind of why did I decide to start this podcast, and just seeing how I have grown. Seeing how I have grown. I really want to go and listen to the very first episode of this podcast and come back and listen to this episode right now and just experience that growth and just see how far I have come, because I am really, truly proud of myself. And I'm really grateful for your support. I'm really grateful to everyone who has been part of this journey, whether directly or indirectly. Thank you. Thank you so much. To those who have kept pushing me, to those who've asked me, why are you not recording? Or when is the next episode coming out? Honestly, guys, I appreciate you so much. What have I learned so far? I have learned that, again, consistency is hard. I have learned so much also about life, because I think most times, I remember I said this one time. I was sharing this with a friend and I was like, sometimes I have prepped for my podcast, or rather the episodes, and I come on here and I say something that I had not even planned to say. And when I listen to myself, I'm like, oof, okay, that is some wisdom right there. And I remember I mentioned this to them and they're like, okay, I think I'm going to go listen to that podcast. So yeah, I think I have also one of the greatest experiences that I've had through this podcast is that, in as much as, yes, I know that this podcast is not for me, but it is for you who's listening to this, it's the fact that it has also spoken to my life as well. I have gotten to learn so much about abundance. I've gotten to learn so much about living life to the fullest. And getting to learn that, getting to experience that, to know that there's so much about life. There's so much that God wants for me, for my life. There is just so much that is out there for me. There's so much that God desires for me. Just knowing that the plans that I have for myself, if I'm to compare them with the plans that, God has for me, I would be amazed. I would be just blown away. So that is one of the things that I have been particularly happy to learn and to experience. And I'd say that my favorite episode are all of them, of course, but I truly have, I don't know if I should call it a soft spot, but I would say that my favorite episode is the very first episode that we did this year of shooting your shot and putting yourself out there. That has been a great episode for me. I mean, it was a bit vulnerable, it was raw, it was, I don't know what adjectives I can use to describe that episode rather, but just having that conversation of putting yourself out there, what it means, how uncomfortable it can be or it may be. I mean, it's not my favorite episode because I particularly enjoyed it, but it's my favorite episode because it really caused me to think a lot about my life, especially in a year when I told myself that I want to arise, that I want to shine, for the world to see my light and for the world to see that which God has put inside of me. So that has been my favorite episode, and all of them, of course, are my favorite episodes. So be sure to go and check out all our previous episodes, binge on all of them if you may, and share them with a friend or two, and just invite them to become part of the Abundant Self podcast. What are my plans? I think for the future, there's so much. I think there's so many great things that are going to be coming up on the podcast. So be sure to stay tuned for this and so much more. On to today's episode. Like I said, today we are going to be asking the question, is life really worth living? That is the question that we are going to be asking on today's episode. And of course, the reason I decided to have this as the episode that sort of ushers us in to our 1-year anniversary is because the guiding thought, or like I said, the school of thought that we have had here on the podcast ever since day one is that, none of us was created to eat, sleep, pay bills, and die. We have been created to have life and have it in abundance. God came that we may have life and have it in abundance. And I remember in that first episode, I asked myself, or rather I was asking you, the listener, what does it really mean to have life and life in abundance, right? What does it mean to live life to the fullest? And the conversations that I have been having with my friends of late somehow has been geared towards, is life really worth living? There's so many things that are going on around us. And like for us here in Kenya, the economic climate is just, my God. The political climate is just, I don't even know how to call it. But things have been really rough for very many of us. Life has not exactly been easy. And it's in those moments that you ask yourself, is life really worth living? So today when I was coming home, I was on a bike, on a boda, and the guy from the boda, I don't know how we even start these conversations. If you have your boda guy, you just know sometimes there's so many memes usually that go on actually about a boda guy can be talking to you about something, and then you just say yes, and you don't even know what they've told you. But today we were just having this conversation. I was like, Connie, you already know what I'm talking about, what I'm going to be talking about on the podcast. And he was saying how he was giving me his story about how this one time he got conned. And it wasn't actually the first time he got conned, but he got conned off so much money, and like that got him down for a very long time. And in that moment, he felt hopeless. He couldn't wake up in the morning, or rather there was that need. He felt that need, maybe I don't even need to wake up today. I work so hard. How is it that such a thing has happened to me? And I remember him saying that he has gone through so many things in life. He has gone through so many challenges, but he still values the life that he lives. And for him, I don't know if he knew what he was doing, telling me that. But I was just listening to him and I'm just like, how many people can actually say that? How many people can actually say that? I have gone through so much. I have experienced all the twists and turns that life can possibly throw my way. But I still have the courage to wake up in the morning and say, yes, this life is actually worth living, to have that hope. And I even remember we had this episode where we were talking about, is hope really realistic? Is having hope really realistic? Because so many times we find that life throws so much around us, and then when someone tells you to have hope, you're really like, have hope. How will hope help my situation? How will hope feed my family? How will hope, heal the ones who are sick? I mean, so many, life can really cause us to ask ourselves so many questions. But the point is to understand that our lives have so much value. They have so much to possibly live for. Like, we have so much to possibly live for than we can possibly imagine, right? And today specifically, I just wanted to talk about a story. Actually, I just wanted to give you guys a story. Now, let's leave the Boda guy aside, right? Let's leave the Boda guy aside. So, I don't know. I think I have told this story either on this podcast or to my friends. I'm sure I have told it to my friends, but I'm not sure if I've said it here on the podcast. I have a feeling I have, but yeah, anyway, let's get to it. So, actually, it's not years. Actually, it's just last year. Let me stop saying a couple. Last year, I had opened my blog. I think for those of you who follow Chabai by Span, I know we have been quiet for a while, but there was a time that I had sent out an invitation to anyone who felt like, they wanted to have their story written on the blog. So I sent out an invitation on my social media platforms. And then, of course, I had people signing up saying, this is my story. This is what I want to talk about. And I still have a couple of those stories with me that I am yet to write about on the blog. But one interesting story is one of this man that I met. His name is Brother Njuguna. And how I met this man, was very interesting. I remember a friend of mine actually is the one so I don't know if she was the one who registered on his behalf or he was, no, actually, I think what my friend did, because apparently this was her former boss at some point in her life. So I remember this man reached out to me and I cannot for the life of me remember how we got connected. But I remember we were chatting on WhatsApp and he was telling me that he got my number, or rather it was me. Okay. Before, clearly I cannot remember this story well, but I remember that we planned to meet. He said he had a story that he wanted to tell. I remember I kept probing him and asking him, okay, what exactly do you want to talk about, so that I can also be prepared when I come do the interview. But he didn't give me the details. I remember I was really struggling trying to ask him, okay, what exactly do you want to talk about? Because in the form that I had created, I was telling guys, okay, what do you want to talk about? Or rather just give me a brief of your story, just to get me ready to even know, what questions I should ask and what have just every journalist day job, yeah? So I remember we met. First of all, I had never met this person before. And I had even tried to tell my friend, do you have his social media pages where I can go and check him out? Still nothing. So it's like I had literally been thrown in the deep end. I was going to meet a man I had never met to tell a story. I didn't even know what story I was going to find on the other side. But I still went. So I remember we met up. He told me he was having a conference, I think. He was having a work conference. But he said that he was going to give me an hour or so. I'm still going to write this story. So you guys, it's good that you're getting a first-hand sort of this story firsthand before I even write it. So yeah, we went, we met, and then of course when I met him, first of all, the first impression was okay, I was not expecting I don't want to say an old man, but I was, even from I don't even know why I hadn't picked that from, the voice on the other side of the call. But I remember I expected him to be a young man. I expected that he was going to be, a certain age or whatever. So I go and meet this man, and I can clearly see, okay, this is, okay, I don't want to say old, but I've already said old, so let me just say old. Yeah, he was a relatively old man, and I was like, okay, so and so should have told me that this is the person I was coming to meet, because it was so unexpected. And I think even for him, he was like, okay. And I remember actually, I remember that I had seen his profile picture, but for some reason I thought, okay, maybe this is one of those people who put their fathers on their profile picture. Honestly, that is what I thought at the time. But anyway, not to digress any further, we had a sit down. I remember sitting down and telling him, okay, so and so gave me your number, said you had a story to tell, so here I am. What is your story? Right? And it was such an awkward place to start. And I remember he was asking me, okay, what do you want exactly to hear from me? What part of my story? And I'm like, let's just have a conversation. So because, of course, I didn't have any backstories, because I didn't even know, this person didn't even have social media. He doesn't have social media channels where I could go and look him up. I just decided to go the old-fashioned name. What do you do? How did your career journey begin? And let me tell you, you guys, I have that draft with me somewhere. I have that draft with me. I have already written the story. I have that draft with me. And I remember just writing that story because I was doing a recording. He was during the interview. I recorded the interview. And I remember just listening to this man. And I was like, oh my word. Oh my days. What an inspiring story. What a story that, yes, was very unexpected. Yes, this is not exactly what I thought I would be coming to hear. But like we always say on Chabai Span, every story is worth telling. And honestly, this is a story that is worth telling. So the long and short of it all, I remember from his story, and something that kept coming up. He was talking to me about how his journey started from the minute he was born, his family background, to the minute he started working, got a job, the very many jobs that he did. I remember he kept telling me, I went and worked at this place for quite a while and I really loved it. He kept saying it every time in those seasons of transitions. I remember he kept saying, but even in that moment, I felt like I was made for the sky. Every single time, like he would go to a place, he would, like, for example, I think there's a place he worked as an electrical engineer. He worked for some time. There's a place he worked as a matatu conductor. There's a place he worked, I think, even I think he was selling beer. I don't know, he was a beer salesman. And every time he kept saying, deep inside of me, I knew that I was meant for the sky. And that is what used to push him to go on to the next level, to keep finding that which was put in his heart, that which God had put inside of him. It is something that he kept repeating over and over again. And for me, I think what stood out for me in his story is that little thing, that little voice that kept reminding him that there was so much about life. There was so much, for the life of me, I cannot even find the right words to put it. But when I was listening to him, what I felt deeply in my heart is that what this man is saying is that in those moments when, yes, he kept hopping from one job to another, when he kept hopping from one business to another, starting one business, starting another, is that it was always that constant feeling inside of him that told him, that reminded him that you were made for more than this, that there's so much about life. There's so much in life that is worth living for, right? And he never really shut that voice down. Because every time that voice came up, some of us may call it intuition, some of us may call it the Holy Spirit, whatever it is you might want to call it, just listening to that inner voice that says, this is not where you were meant to be, that there's so much more. There's so much more out there for you that, I'm even reminded of the story of Abraham where he got up, literally he got up from his home to travel to an unknown land, an unknown territory, a place he never even knew, because in his heart, in his spirit, he knew that there was more out there for him. Right? So I remember when I was listening to that story, I mean, oh my word, you guys, I'm going to write that, or rather I've already written that story. I just need to publish it for you to really read it and see, just him saying that I was made for more. I am meant for the sky. I have been made for so much more than this. And tying it to our question of today, is life really worth living? Right? And for someone like that, I mean, the many disappointments that he got, even if it didn't really manifest itself as disappointment, that discontentment where you're in a situation and you're like, no, I don't think this is for me. And just getting up, being able to get up and say, I think there's more for me out there. Or rather, following that inner compass, that inner guide inside of you that says, yes, you're doing this, but you could be doing this instead. I think that is what gives life meaning. Knowing that, yes, things I may not be doing, or rather, I may not be in a situation that I want to be right now, but just knowing that deep inside of you that it doesn't mean that I have to be here forever. It doesn't mean that I will be here forever. This past week, I met a filmmaker at a podcaster's event, and he was telling me and my friend that even if he was working a job where he was making, millions, right? If he wasn't a filmmaker, it would still, it wouldn't mean anything. And we were saying that idea of I'm damned if I do it, I'm damned if I don't. Because for the longest time he had wanted to be a filmmaker, and I remember he was saying he didn't have a camera. He was always thinking, how will I start? How will I, and he was saying it still kept bothering him that he decided to just start with his smartphone, right? And then he was saying that even if, yes, he would have been out there somewhere earning all the money in the world, it would still keep him up at night if he wasn't a filmmaker. So just listening to that inner guide, knowing that this is what I was made to do. This is what I have been called to do. This is the path that I have been created to walk. And just obeying that inner guide, listening to that inner voice. I mean, that is what makes life worth living. And just being able to realize that. And even from the story that I had with Brother Njuguna, I remember I asked him, I think the biggest lesson that he has had in life. And that was the one lesson he mentioned. Listen to that inner voice. Listen to that inner guide. Sometimes people might think you're crazy, right? And I think I've even mentioned this in the episode on consistency. Sometimes people will really not understand your purpose. Sometimes people will think you're crazy for choosing the path you have chosen to take. But at the end of the day, is your life worth living? Whatever it is that you are doing right now, whatever path it is you have chosen, is your life worth living? Right? And is it worth the sacrifices you have made to either not live the life that is worth living? I don't know, whatever it is you might want to call it. So the question is really not, is life really worth living? The answer is yes. Life is worth living. The question we should be asking ourselves is the life we are living? Is the life you're living? Is it the life that you have been called to live? Right? When you look at life, when you look at the many opportunities that have been presented to you, when you look at the many lessons, the people that have been put, that surround you, whatever it is you might want to call it, is that a life worth living? Is your life is that a life worth living? Is your life a life that is worth living? And if not, what do you need to do to change that? Right? So I remember one of the lessons that I got from Brother Njuguna's story is listen to that inner voice. Never be afraid to pursue your dreams. Never be afraid to not settle. Because for him, he was like, yes, I've started a business. Yes, I'm working as a matatu conductor. Yes, I'm working as a salesman at a bar. But is this really the life that I was meant to live? And every time he kept saying, I was meant for the sky. He just kept saying, I knew I was meant for the sky. And just listening to this man who has experienced life more than I have say those words for me, it just made me realize that there's absolutely so much that is out there for me. Most of the time we are told these things by, motivational speakers, our parents, whoever it is you may want to call it. You read them in books. But do we really understand that? Do we really understand that life is worth living? Do you really understand that what makes life worth living is, the purpose for which you have been placed on this earth? And honestly, I will never get tired. I will never get tired of saying that over and over again. That we have been created for a certain purpose. We have been created to live life to the fullest. I don't think I will ever stop saying that. So listen to that inner voice. For that filmmaker, it's just wanting to start. Even for me with this podcast, just knowing that there's this thing that I have in my heart that I want everyone to know about, that I believe God wants me to share with everyone. And starting this podcast was a manifestation of me listening to that inner voice, me listening to that inner guide, inner compass that God has put inside of me. Whether it is in terms of, whether it shows itself in terms of intuition, just even if I'm to call it the Holy Spirit, because yes, it is the Holy Spirit, and just not taking that for granted. Right? Another thing that he mentioned to me, I think that I believe is important to even share on here is that we always need to pursue excellence in everything that we do. And I remember he even used the example of my blog, saying, for you who is doing this blog, would you say that you are doing it in absolute excellence? Or are you just doing it for the sake of doing it? And that caused me, of course, to really ask myself a lot of questions. And I'd also like to present that same challenge with you, or rather for you, to you, is that whatever it is you're doing right now, are you pursuing it with the excellence it deserves? And especially where your purpose is concerned, because sometimes I think we might put and, invest a lot of our times in things that don't really matter. But when we have an understanding of what our purpose is, when we discover what that is, or rather in whatever area it is that God has placed us, whether it is in our workplace, in school, in our lives, with our relationships, with whatever it is that we are doing, are we pursuing all that with excellence? And I think another thing is just recognizing that your life has so much worth, has so much value, and it is important that you live that life to the absolute fullest. When Brother Njuguna was saying that he was meant for the sky, just think about it. When you say that you're meant for the sky, it really means that you are meant to experience life in its fullest, in its absolute optimum, right? So that in those moments where you find yourself settling for things that you know for a fact will not help you, or rather will not complement you living life to the fullest, it becomes easy for you to say, no, I was meant for the sky. I was meant for more than this. And sometimes you might think more means something so big, something so out of this world. But I think I even mentioned this in the episode on discovering purpose. Sometimes you might find that your purpose is not so big compared to the purpose of someone else. You might feel like your purpose is it's literally a drop in the ocean. But without that drop, the ocean is not an ocean anymore. If the ocean is an ocean without that drop, I don't even know if I'm making sense, but Yeah, sometimes you might think that the input, or rather the value that you give life, or that you put in life, is so little, is so minute. But trust me, that little, however little, relatively small, that impact, that input might be in your eyes, trust me, it has a ripple effect that is going to be felt for generations to come. So never despise the impact that you have in whatever area of life that you're in. Never despise that impact. Never despise that thing that God has put inside of you. It could be little. For Jonah, it was as simple as just preaching the message of repentance. For Jesus, it was saving all of humanity. It doesn't mean that Jonah's purpose was, insignificant compared to that of Jesus, because sometimes we find ourselves in situations where we look at the lives of other people and say, this person is living, this person is the one who is truly making an impact in life. But who says that you are not making an impact? Sometimes just being the person who is listening to a friend, just giving that word of encouragement, asking someone a simple question of, how is your heart? I have a friend who really asks that a lot. So it could be as simple as asking someone, how is your heart? But you have no idea the kind of impact that you have made in that person's life. So it is important for us to recognize that our lives have so much value. Our lives have so much worth. You are a worthy human being. Yes, we, in the eyes of our Creator, of course, we are not even worthy to be alive, right? There's so many things about our lives that are not, worth being proud of. But I always like to say that waking up in the morning, having breath in your lungs, is just another testament to the fact that you are meant to be here. There is a reason you are alive. And yes, life is worth living. And because it is worth living, it is important that we live it to the absolute fullest. The absolute fullest, where you don't reduce life to the mundane things. You don't reduce life to a simple job. You don't reduce life to maybe making a certain amount of money. But like the filmmaker who says that I have to be a filmmaker. It doesn't matter how much money I'm making doing another job. I have to be a filmmaker. For me, it is important for me to talk about this message of abundance. It is important for me to share with the world that it is possible to live life to the fullest. Yes, that despite all the many challenges, despite all the many twists and turns, despite the many disheartening things that go on around us, it is possible to live life to the fullest. And that doesn't have to be tied to money. That doesn't have to be tied to your status. It doesn't matter who you are. God came that you may have life and life in abundance. So it is important for you to realize, what does that mean? What would that mean for you as an individual? For Brother John, it meant being able to serve, God and man, being a teacher of the word, being a teacher of, human beings, and just letting them experience the love of God in his work in church and in the seminary. And just being able to see this man. I remember sitting on the other side of the table and seeing this man and saying that this is, where, or rather what I aspire to become. To know that I did not settle down in situations, or I did not settle down for circumstances. I did not settle down in places where I knew I did not deserve to be in, right? I did not deserve to, or rather, I did not settle down in places or with people, whatever it is you might want to call it, where I know I would be sabotaging, my own life or the quality of my life. Sometimes, like I said, life can really do a number on us, that we find ourselves asking that question. Is life really worth living? Like the Boda guy who was just telling me all the many, the con stories that he has had to experience, and those moments where he asked himself, is life really worth living? And the answer was yes. The answer was yes. Life is worth living. No matter how dark or hopeless the situation may be, you always need to remind yourself that you are valuable. Your life is valuable, and you have been made for so much more. We're always being told to not let situations or circumstances define us, but do we really understand what that means? Do we really understand what it means to surrender the many burdens that we have on our shoulders? Do we really understand what it means to know that we are valuable, that our lives are valuable, and that we have been called to live life to the fullest? Do we really understand what it means when we say that you are meant to live your life to the fullest? That you deserve to live life to the fullest because Christ came that you may have life and have it in full. So when that question comes, when you find yourself in that situation, when you find yourself asking that question of, is life really worth living? You can be confident to say that life is worth living. The twists and the turns, the joy, the sadness, all those nice and not so nice, seasons, they are what make life worth living because they bring out the best in us. Even those moments that are not so good, they bring out the people that, God wants us to be, the lessons, the experiences, the people, the seasons, all those many things, they are what make life worth living. And that is what we talk about here on the podcast. And I'm so happy that I have been able to share this with you this past year, and that I will continue to share this with you in the years to come as God wills it. Yeah. And so, yes, that is what I basically wanted to share with you today, is that life is worth living. So when you ask yourself that question, is life really worth living? I hope you have the confidence, or rather you confidently say that, yes, life is worth living. And then you go back and ask yourself, the life that I'm living right now, is it worthy of, the kind of path that God has called me to live? Is the life you're living right now, is it a representation of what was created or was destined or purposed for you? And then what can you do? What can you do to make life worth living? What is it that you need to do to live life to the fullest? And that is a question that I will leave for you even as I bring this episode to a close. For some reason, I always tell myself this is going to be a short episode, but then when I start talking, when I start talking, I don't even know what happens. I just keep going and going and going. But at the end of it all, I truly hope that I have added value to your life, to you at this particular moment. And I really cannot wait to see what this next year has for us here on the podcast. And I just want to say a big thank you to all of you who have been a part of this journey, whether directly or indirectly, to all my listeners who've been here ever since the very first the very first episode, when I had a lot of feelings. I don't even know if I knew how to speak. But yes, actually, if you'd like, you can join me in listening to episode 1 of the podcast and then coming back and listening to this particular episode and just seeing the growth that has been, because I believe that there's been growth. And a friend of mine was actually mentioning to me that I have been growing throughout the podcast, and I think for her it's also because she has been one of my day one listeners. So whether or not you have been a day one listener, thank you for your support. To all my listeners from Kenya, Uganda, Brazil, all the countries that have been tuning into the episodes, Nigeria, Costa Rica, I think, Argentina. There's so many, but I'm so happy to see the impact, or rather see the reach that this podcast has had in this year. And I cannot wait to see what God will be doing in the years to come. So we will be taking a short hiatus. I think, this is the perfect time to say that we will be taking a short hiatus, I think for about a month, to just re-strategize and to just refocus on what we can do more here on the podcast. I think I did an episode on learning to take breaks, learning to press pause, and how even that has a huge impact on our lives. So again, you can go and listen to that episode. Actually, in the meantime, you can binge on all the episodes that we have had so far from episode 1 to episode 2022. We've also had quite a bit of bonus episodes in between. So I think we are about 25, 24, 23 episodes in. So be sure to listen to all our episodes, share this podcast with a friend, share this podcast with whoever you know needs to hear this message of abundance, this message of, living life to the fullest. And like I said, there's so many good things coming up. But in the meantime, you can also check out our social media platforms. We are on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter, at the Abundant Self Podcast. And I will be releasing something special for you on the 1st of August for my Instagram followers. So be sure to check out my Instagram page at the Abundant Self _podcast and stay tuned for that and so much more. I honestly do not want to close this episode. But yes, thank you for tuning in so far. Thank you for your input. Thank you for the many great feedbacks that I have been getting. Honestly, they keep me going and they keep reminding me why I decided to do this episodes, to do this podcast. And I cannot wait. I cannot wait for what is coming up or the many great things that are in store for us. I don't know. I just have a feeling to say that I just want to invite for your prayers, even as I continue to sort of re-strategize and just keep really sort of immersing myself in the vision that I have for this podcast. So your prayers are welcome, your thoughts, or actually just reach out to me and let me know, what do you want to hear more of? It's not really a seasonal podcast, so it's not going to be like a season 2 or any sort of that thing, but what do you want to hear more moving forward in the next year to come? What do you think I should do better? What do you think I should keep doing right here on the podcast? And I think that would really help to add value to what we do here on the podcast. I think, like I've said this so many times before, this podcast is not for me. This podcast is for you who's listening to this. So I want to ensure that I'm adding value to your life and that I keep showing up for you as best I can. So for this short hiatus, I will be showing up for myself as well and just feeding into my spirit, feeding into my heart, feeding in to my cup, so that even as I come and pour out myself to you, even as I come and pour out this message to you, that I will be doing so from a cup that is overflowing. So send all your support. I thank you for your support. I thank you for your prayers so far, and I'm looking forward to the great things that are coming up ahead. So yes, this is a part where I say that if you remember absolutely nothing else from today's episode, I hope you remember that you have been called to have life and life in abundance, and that I am rooting for you. Until next time, bye-bye.